Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi PCL235B 18-volt brushed impact driver. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first up we have the battery slot. Now the battery slot on this particular tool is located at the bottom like it usually is on all impact drivers, and it works just fine. But there is quite a bit of looseness or play to speak of, so I would have liked to have seen a little bit tighter tolerances considering, well, Ryobi is such a large manufacturer and they can afford to get it right the first time, or the third time, or the fourth time, whatever generation this impact driver is. They could have gotten it a little bit tighter and, well, quite frankly, it's a little bit annoying. But it doesn't interrupt the power going to the motor, and I haven't had any batteries fall out, so it's still going to get a pass. It's just more of a nitpicking thing for me personally, considering the price of the tool. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's completely adequate and it gets the job done, but it could be refined. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the belt clip mounting points. Now there are two different belt clip mounting points on either side of the tool, and they've upgraded from the old wire style belt clips to the newer screw-on style belt clips, but unfortunately Ryobi felt like being cheap and did not include any belt clips with this particular tool, which is a disappointment. I do, however, like the fact that they're using the screw-on style now, because that means that you can use third market accessories like aftermarket belt clips as well as bit holders that you can, well, screw into this point, and, well, that's just a handy new feature that you'll have to pay extra for. But still, it is a nice upgrade over the previous generation's wire belt clip. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next aspect of the tool. Okay, next up we have the LED light. Now the LED light in this particular impact driver is an upgrade from the previous generation, at least when it comes to the area that the light takes up. The amount of light it produces is about the same, unfortunately, and we lost some beloved features like the bit holder and magnet tray. So quite frankly, this isn't really an upgrade in my opinion, and that's actually in more ways than one. And to show you what I'm talking about, let's go ahead and compare this against several other impact drivers from Ryobi. Okay, first up we have the new one, the previous generation, and then a previous generation brushless impact driver. So let's go ahead and see how these compare. Okay, first up we have the new one, and you can tell that the light is pretty dang weak here. It's not putting out much light, and it's definitely a cooler white color, which is going to make it even harder to see in dark situations. So quite frankly, other than the area directly in front of the light, it's pretty pathetic. Now moving on to the second generation, or the previous generation, we can see that it's a much warmer light and it's definitely a brighter light. So quite frankly, the previous generation actually had a better LED light even though it was much smaller. Go figure. And then we have the tri-beam illumination from the brushless impact driver, which I think is 3 generations old at this point, or at least 2 generations old, and it's doing a fantastic job. It's illuminating everything in front of the light because it has 3 different LED lights on top, bottom, and on the side. So quite frankly, it is definitely the winner in this competition. It's rather weird that Ryobi decided to give up their tri-beam illumination in favor of a much cheaper, weaker, and much more pathetic light when the competition from Harbor Freight is, well, copying the design from the 3 generation old light and is doing it at a much better price point. Go figure. It's almost as if Ryobi is actively screwing over their customers for profit. But I wouldn't be one to say that or anything. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the grip and ergonomics of the tool. Now, starting off with the grip on this particular tool is very good. I'm not going to give it a hard time because they did pretty much everything right. They featured a nice rubberized texture that has indentations and bumps, as well as a molded pattern that will allow you to maintain your grip on this particular tool even if your hands are wet or oily. So quite frankly, they did a good job there. And the size is perfectly adequate for the majority of people unless you have gorilla-sized hands. And, well, quite frankly, I don't have any complaints about which direction they have the motor facing, or which angle they have the motor facing. It seems to be pointed at a fairly neutral 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock position, and this is going to be very comfortable for most work situations. So no complaints there either. The one area I do have a complaint about would be just the fact that it's a very top-heavy tool because of the large brushed motor. And this is definitely a disappointment because a lot of manufacturers are starting to ditch brushed motors entirely, and the fact is there are competition, or competitors I should say, out there that are featuring brushless motors at a cheaper price point. So the ergonomics when it comes to the handling of this particular tool when it's above your head are a little bit disappointing because of how top heavy it is. So quite frankly, this is an area of the tool that could be improved in the future if Ryobi ever decides to finally ditch the brushed motors, which I hope and pray that they do. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the trigger. Now the trigger on this particular impact driver is going to be a fairly run-of-the-mill trigger for a Ryobi tool. It's made out of black plastic that has indentations that have been molded into it, and there is no rubberized texture unlike on previous generations of impact drivers. Not the previous generation, but several generations older, they used to put rubberized texture on the trigger, and I quite like that. And I'm rather sad to see that they don't do that anymore. Quite frankly, the trigger on this particular impact driver is pretty dang average. It's rather difficult to achieve the slowest speed, but the second slowest speed is easy to achieve, and working your way up slowly from there is very easy to do. Until you get to the second high speed to the highest speed. There's quite a bit of jump in between the second high speed and the high speed, and if you're not expecting that, that can sometimes make your fasteners, well, flip or go sideways. So quite frankly, just be aware of that and you won't have any major issues. It really is a pretty standard or average trigger, and I've seen far better and I've seen far worse. It's just middle of the pack, but it's good enough to get a pass from me. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the impact driver's selector switch, which is basically just a fancy way of saying forward and reverse and locked. Now the selector switch on this particular impact driver is made out of a gray plastic and is fairly, well, average. It is very easy to put into whatever gear you needed to put it into, and it's not going to be in the way, and it's easy to get it into the neutral or locked position, which is going to be a plus if you're the kind of person that gets highly annoyed when you overshoot it multiple times in a row. So quite frankly, I don't really have much else to say about the selector switch, and it gets a pass from me. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the bit collar, the chuck, or the bit holder, whatever you want to call it. I like calling it the chuck, so that's what I'm going to call it. The chuck on this particular impact driver is a fairly basic design. Well, actually, it's about as basic as you can possibly get. It's one of the completely manual styles. You have to pull it forward in order to put the bit in or out, and there is no auto-ejecting feature. It's simple, but it's reliable, and I haven't really had any major issues with it. It seems to be able to hold on to bits that you put into it, including spade or wood bits, and quite frankly, it does its job perfectly fine. So as far as I'm concerned, the collar, chuck, or whatever you want to call it, is completely acceptable, even though it is a low-tech or old-tech design. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, without a battery, the impact driver weighs 1,176 grams, which is about 2.6 pounds. And with a 4 amp hour battery, it weighs a little over 4 pounds, so it's definitely on the larger side of a modern day impact driver, but it's still manageable. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this particular impact driver in use. And I have to say, even though I harped on it a lot before, it isn't a half-bad little impact driver, and for the average homeowner, it's going to be more than enough. And even possibly for some professionals that are going to be using this occasionally. Not everyday use, but occasional use. But with that being said, let's talk about its performance. I have to say that its performance at driving in deck screws or just regular old drywall screws into wood is more than satisfactory, and it does a good job at doing that. I will say that I personally would prefer using a brushless impact driver because they're usually lighter, but as a backup, this isn't a half-bad option to have. And I've also used it for helping assemble portable shelters or sheds or garages where you typically need to have 3 different bolt sizes, and having individual sockets on individual impact drivers is the better way of going and having, well, 3 different socket sizes and a single impact driver when you have to switch it out every 5 seconds. So quite frankly, I'm very happy with this particular tool in that regard as well. And you can also use this as a spade bit driver in a pinch if you don't have a drill handy. I was able to drill 5 consecutive 1-inch holes, and the impact driver handled that just fine. It did have a hot hammer or bit holder by the end of it, but it was more than a good enough performance to, well, meet my needs. So quite frankly, I'm happy with it in that regard as well. Quite frankly, this is a fairly average impact driver for Ryobi. I am a little bit disappointed that they did away with some of the previous features that you could find on their older generation impact driver, which is actually still available on HomeDepot.com, and I would buy that one over this particular model any day of the week. But for this particular tool, if you are buying a larger tool set, and this is one of the tools in it, I would not feel gypped by getting it. Quite frankly, I think it's a perfectly acceptable little impact driver, and it's more than, well, good enough for the average homeowner. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the pros and cons. And the first pro is 18 volt. 18 volt means that you can use battery adapters from other brands, and this will be compatible with all your Ryobi branded batteries. Just remember that if you are using a battery adapter in this particular tool, you do that at your own risk. Well built. This is a fairly well built impact driver, and I think it's definitely going to be able to survive a fall or two. It seems to be very well built, and so quite frankly I would consider that to be a pro. belt clip mount. The belt clip mount is definitely a nice upgrade over the previous generation's wire belt clip, and quite frankly, I do like having the screw-in style belt clip. It's just a little bit of a disappointment that they didn't include any with the tool. Come on, Ryobi. Strap mount. The strap mount is going to be another useful feature that was, well, absent from the previous generation of this particular tool, and is a welcome new feature, even though Ryobi did take away other features. But for me personally, having the strap mount is a nice feature to have. And the first meh would be the weak LED. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but come on, Ryobi. You can do better than what you did here, and quite frankly, it's a little bit disappointing. It's not going to be the worst con, but it's definitely a meh. And the other meh would be heavy. This does help with the build quality, having the increased weight, but at the same time, it's definitely a little bit of a chunky boy. Moving on. And the first con would be brush. The fact that this is using a brush motor when a lot of Ryobi's competition is currently switching over to brushless motors is definitely a disappointment, and something I believe that the company needs to rectify in the near future. At the same price point. Moving on. Missing old features. Yes, I'm still going to harp on the fact that I missed the bit holder as well as the magnetic tray. And if you are one of those individuals that say that it didn't need those particular features, there's plenty of other brands for you to choose from, so go use one of those other brands. Moving on. And the next con would be price. Coming in at $60 US, this particular impact driver is a little bit on the high side, especially considering that some of its competition is featuring brushless motors and costing, well, $20 less. So, quite frankly, this is an area of this particular tool that could use some improvement. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular impact driver. This particular impact driver's design and feature set is definitely aging quickly, and a lot of its competition is going to be, well, more affordable and have more advanced features such as brushless motors, tri-beam illuminations, and auto-ejecting bit loaders, or holders, or chucks, whatever you want to call them. Quite frankly, I really think Ryobi needs to revisit their marketing strategy with this particular tool. About the only way I can really recommend buying this particular tool new is if you're not, well, bought into any tool system, and you're looking to buy Ryobi tools for the first time during the holidays when they have one of their large 6-tool sets on sale for around $200. Then I think that's going to be an appropriate use of your money. But if you're looking to just buy this particular tool brand new today, and you already have Ryobi batteries, or you're looking to upgrade from a previous generation impact driver that's still functional, I would say, well, skip this one and buy the previous generation one, because that's still going to be the better deal here. So quite frankly, that's all I have to say about this particular impact driver. Only buy it when it's part of a set, or if it's on sale or clearance. So yeah, see you next time. That is it for this particular video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. God bless.